What's the opinion of New Delhi vis-a-vis Europeans and trying to maybe get deeper ties with China then? Would that be an absolute catastrophic blow for New Delhi in terms of any reliance on Europe for markets or whatever?
That's in fact one of the biggest worries we have with America, with what Trump is doing right now. Because as Trump sees it, China is the big threat and he needs Russia to contain China because Korea and Japan and Taiwan can't do it by themselves. So you
Hmm.
need Russia to join the containment. The problem is Europe then needs to contain Russia. And who's the big one who can contain Russia? That's China. So invariably, the closer Russia gets to America, if that happens, the Indian wet dream comes true in some alternate parallel universe and Russia and America get together, gang up on China. Europe's natural outlet against Russia becomes China. And there it's the technology flows that are going to matter.
This is the Global Gambit.
How are you going, everybody? Right now, things are happening very fast. That's a bit of a pretty, nebulous opening, but I think it's just trying to wrap our heads around ceasefires in Ukraine, potentially, situations in the Middle East, Syria, Israel. And amongst all of this is great power competition. And a country that I've always thought should be part of that conversation for various reasons is India, and somewhere that we've covered a lot on the channel in different ways. And someone who has been part of that conversation on numerous occasions at this point is Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, who is kind enough to join us again for a wide-ranging, I think, set of conversations. Abhijit, welcome back. To dive straight in, you've been observing things quite well extensively from your side of the globe, and I'm curious how you very broadly to begin with look at the emerging US-Indo relations. Modi was in the White House in Washington, about 3 weeks ago, as part of various different leaders. So I'd love to hear your takes on those meetings and takeaways that you have on.
So, first, thanks for having me on, Pyotr. Um, Look, this relationship, Trump and Modi have a very personal relationship, and it's a very good equation. Modi, of course, invests in all his relationships. There is not a single world leader, even of small countries, say Papua New Guinea or something like that, that he doesn't go out of his way, to charm and make them feel welcome and things like that. But with Trump, it's a particularly good relationship because, he's spoken about that in the Lex Friedman podcast that released yesterday. And
Yeah.
today, Trump's linked, I don't know what, you don't tweet on Truth Social. I guess you truth it out on Truth Social. So he's put it up on his Truth Social as a link for everybody to watch. And there, Modi, praises his courage in how at the Houston Howdy Modi arena, President Trump actually went into the crowd without security vetting with him because he had that much trust in Modi and he felt the same courage that Trump had during the assassination attempt on him. Now, these two people get along very, very well. At the same time, if you listen to President Trump's comments after the meeting with Modi, um, they don't sacrifice national interests to appease each other. They're very clear, we're aligned on security. They're very clear, China is the big threat in the room. China needs to be contained. India, of course, opposes any kind of alliance, an alliance in being, but not an alliance, a formal alliance against China, because then that'll set off the same dynamics as NATO expanding eastwards towards Russia. We don't want that. We don't want to generate a threat for China. Um, they're very aligned on this. They're very aligned on India wanting to buy more American equipment, India being trusted more transfers of technology and things like that. The only thing that they don't agree on is tariffs and trade, because India has a lot of protectionist tariffs. Now, there's an issue with that again.
Mm-hmm.
There is a whole load of protection on the American side as well. So Trump is very keen to sell Florida oranges to India. The problem is Indian mangoes aren't allowed into America. Now, even if we signed a mutual treaty where oranges for mangoes deal, And let me tell you this, having lived in America, American mangoes really suck. I mean, there's bad mangoes and then there's American mangoes, or rather Azteca mangoes from Mexico that they import. The issue is the customs and quarantine department, because they do not allow the import of agricultural material from outside the Americas to without all kinds of headache clearances and things like that. And the Indian argument that is that it adds very significant costs. It amounts to a tariff effectively. It's a hidden tariff, and that's where the negotiations are at. Which is why, India hasn't been hit by tariff hikes so far, because it's an ongoing negotiation. It's a fair negotiation. And there are things, for example, when we open up the market, American companies don't do well. Ford, for a while in between, there was this small SUV they had that was the biggest seller in the Indian market. They didn't focus on it. They tossed away their market lead, and they decided to withdraw from India about 3, 4 years back. It's the same on a whole range of issues. Harley Davidson. The first time around, Trump said, "You're going to remove tariffs on it." We removed tariffs on it. Nobody bought Harley Davidsons in India, because in India, the view of a Harley Davidson is biker gangs, druggy gangs driving around in Harley Davidsons wearing leather jackets and leather and Nazi style helmets in rural America. And in India, if you want to be posh, you buy a Royal Enfield, which is a much nicer bike, and it has much nicer colors and shades and things like that anyway. So there's a whole host of issues, but the difference is, unlike certain other countries that are grandstanding and doing diplomacy in public, India's dealing with it very quietly behind the scenes, which is what we've always done with Trump. We do not negotiate with Trump through TV or press statements. So it works very well. These are two leaders who understand each other. They know how to work each other. They know how to get past each other.
What about the unpredictability of Trump? As we've seen already in the past month, to quote one academic I was listening to, a lot of what's been happening is not necessarily a surprise. But I think what is catching some people off guard is the rate and, should we say, overlappingness of everything. Trump is not holding back and wanting to make adjustments to lots of different things simultaneously. And that includes over tariffs and trade wars and commerce. And, the UK thought it was going to be free of potentially being hit because Starmer was trying to balance, US-UK special relationship with, commitments to Ukraine or European policy. But they've been hit by tariffs. So are you not fearful that Trump's unpredictability could still come back to, bite Modi's beliefs?
So far from it. We think Trump is one of the most robust and predictable presidents around. The realignment of policy that we see happening has all been to India's advantage. Remember, our entire geopolitical focus for the last 70 years has been to either break up or avoid any kind of alignment between Russia and China. And anybody who makes that easy for us, and our wet dream essentially, is America and Russia coming together to contain China. Now, if anything, if you come to Delhi and ask people, they'll tell you, well, it isn't rapid enough. We don't just need a Trump, crushing about 8 years of presidency into a month. We also need JD Vance to succeed him to stay the course and build up all the dependencies and process dependencies and institutional dependencies and institutional linkages so that something like that actually happens for us. This is a very good thing for us. And because it's so China focused, we're actually looking forward to a much higher level of security clearances. Now, security clearances have never been an issue with American technology in India. It's a kind of a bipartisan issue, but generally the Republicans are willing to go at least 50% ahead of any Democrat government. If you remember the India-US nuclear deal, which was a big, big thing,
Which one?
it was done by George Bush. Democrat presidents tend to want to be status quo and go with the flow, even though Ash Carter, who was Obama's Secretary of Defense, uh, did speed that process up significantly, but the real impetuses always come during Republican presidents, at least for the last 20 years or so. So for us, we see nothing negative about Trump. One of our biggest gripes has, in fact, been US aid and its interference in Indian politics. So, him shutting down US aid is like every Indian now wants to buy Trump a non alcoholic beer. I mean, because, we have a very difficult relationship with alcohol and meat. So, we want to buy him a non alcoholic beer because if you remember, just before, about a month before the American elections, the BJP, the ruling party, from its official handle, tweeted out an accusation against both State Department and USAID, accusing them of funding opposition parties, funding opposition, and interfering in Indian politics. And the tight leash that has been put on state and the effective dismemberment of USAID, most of us are very happy.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind with all of this is what some academics have been calling a reverse Kissinger. You sort of touched upon it, which was that this whole idea that, much like what Kissinger tried to do with the Chinese, communist China in the 70s vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, Trump in some realms is trying to do with Russia to China. I'm pretty skeptical of that because I don't think Trump has the diplomatic statecraft of Kissinger. Whether you think it was good or not, I think Kissinger is a little bit more knowledgeable in these sorts of things. I just don't see it likely happening. Do you think that, from a New Delhi perspective, policymakers in India do see that as a potential? Because obviously Trump's focus is China, but I'm still skeptical how much he can sort of bring Putin on side, so to speak, especially if the Europeans are being a nuisance by trying to, continue to support Ukraine, right?
So somewhere between American manufacturing prowess being reinvigorated and Russia's ability to supply commodities and things like that American industry needs, there's certainly a market match out there.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say for now. Like Trump himself said before he got elected, that Ukraine is in many ways easier to solve than the Israel-Palestine conflict, but it'll require a lot more work. Now, I don't know what's in his head, of course, but as a general rule, I have come to trust Trump's native intelligence over the theoretical philosophical intelligence of scholars sitting in endless conferences in five-star hotels, myself included. This is a man who delivered the Abraham Accords when nobody thought that was humanly possible. And these are all presidents with great pretensions of scholarship like Obama or Bill Clinton, and who employed a whole load of Harvard graduates and Yale graduates and whatnot to sit and ponder incessantly on this. I think he's got an instinctive feel, which I value much more than a sort of scholarly, academic college professor approach to things. There have been lots of examples of this. There is the case of Salazar in Portugal, who was a professor of economics at Coimbra University. And the Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, who was described by many people to be semi-literate. And yet, Portugal went nowhere under Salazar. Spain became the 10th biggest economy under semi-literate Francisco Franco. I can give you a whole load of historical examples like this, where the more you know, the more you tend to be bogged down by doubt and nuance, which prevents you from taking the kind of bold decisions required to break a deadlock. It's typical Sadat. Sadat was very self-educated, and yet it took his courage to, fly to Tel Aviv and braving Israeli missiles and breaking the ice. I think once in, say, 2-3 decades, you get a politician like that, and I'm grateful for it.
Okay. I mean, we're going to disagree, I think, on some distinctions there. I appreciate the transactionality of Trump's foreign policy, and I understand why that would be of interest to India, to Modi's government. And I think that India has done a remarkable job in its foreign policy. But I do think that Trump is perhaps being a little bit unnecessarily destructive. He can make the Europeans need to pick up their own security and defense, which I agree with. But I don't think he needs to take a torch to as many things as he seems to be doing. But, you're welcome to disagree with me on that. I think one of the things that I would be interested in a bit more of your opinion is the Indo-US security assurance deviations there. Obviously, we have a new DNI there, and I'm curious what you think Trump's government could be trying to do with India vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis the Quad, vis-a-vis I2U2 in the Middle East, and sort of generally this sort of broader security framework around the world, and where you see India playing in there.
So all of this, except I2U2, what's now become the IMEC corridor,
Okay.
is the big laggard in all of this is India, because we don't understand seamless interoperability. If you look at the other three members of the Quad, Australia, Japan, and America, they all function under the Aegis system or a completely integrated radar system. And I'm mostly talking about navies, but the Air
Yes.
Force and armies are also seamlessly integrated, right? They can function very easily together. The odd man out is India, primarily because we're a third world country. You need to look at this in terms of where our industrial prowess is. It's not very high. We're also stuck in an 80s kind of an understanding of military warfare, where a system is a system. A system isn't one in a system of systems, which is where America is at.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that restricts a lot of the synergies that can be brought around with Quad. It also becomes a problem with all the other military issues because India isn't able to absorb the technology that America offers us. It's changing, but it's changing slowly. The problem's always been on the Indian side, where the bureaucracy wants control over everything, but they don't really run a serious operational security thing. If you're high up enough in the hierarchy, you get to break security rules. You get to just break rules in general and get away with it. I don't know if you noticed this, but about 3 months back, I posted all these fitness app trackers where officers were literally taking smartphones and smart watches into our nuclear submarines, which should have been court-martialed, and it's a crime. You should be court-martialed and sacked for it. No, nothing happened. They were literally being taken into nuclear storage bunkers, and there was no action taken. So America has some very valid concerns which India isn't addressing. The problem is entirely on the Indian side. When it comes to Europe, I think India has generally found Europe to be quite insufferable to deal with as a collective whole. It's something we wished had never happened, and it's more of a nuisance for us. We much prefer dealing with the French or the Italians on a one on one basis because they're very cold and calculated in their approach in their national interest. And we find it very easy to work with them individually. The French and the Italians, particularly, but also the Brits at a certain level, though we don't trust them. But France would rank very close in terms of trust. The problem is they always lose that trust when it comes to Europe as a whole. And what happens is, if you look at the embassies in Delhi, all the good stuff is handled by the embassies. They dump all the bad stuff on the EU ambassador to do. So every time the EU ambassador walks into any office, the eyebrows go up and it's like, oh God, this clown again. On the other hand, when the French ambassador walks in, it's like, oh, yay, look, it's one of our friends. When the Italian ambassador walks in, oh, yay, fantastic. So Europe has kind of brought this on itself as far as India goes. And of course, we disagree completely on our perspectives on Russia. The Indian perspective on Russia is very, very different.
I want to come to China specifically, which is two-pronged sort of question. The first one is really just, we've seen what some media outlets have framed as being a rapprochement between Beijing and New Delhi. Do you think that that is true? Are we seeing a thawing of relations? And if so, why and to what extent? But also, is that really going to mean anything longer term? I don't see that, given everything you've mentioned about Trump and Modi and their broader grand strategical overlaps.
It's not going to mean anything much. It's gone from bad to less bad. That's about it. There are certain things which China produces in volume, like solar panels, that we need, because one of the things we're trying to do is a massive solar project where about 100 million houses are going to have solar panels on their roof to reduce the load on the grid and things like that. It's part of a larger plan to move towards a complete solar and nuclear grid. And if you know, solar is much easier that way because most of urban India can afford solar. So keep nuclear power for industry and the rural areas and things like that. Uh, Other than that, other than our need for cheap Chinese phones, cheap Chinese computers and pads, there is little to no um, congruity or trust with China. The reset is just reset prior to 2020, which was still a very difficult relationship.
Well, that's still quite a significant shift, no? I mean, 2020 was such a big deal. And I've always referenced it whenever I've talked about India because of that border clash. You don't see anything more positive on the horizon. I mean, I personally don't with the CCP, but it's purely materialistic.
It's purely materialistic. I don't think, this isn't the first time we've had fatal clashes with the Chinese. Prior to that, there was clashes in 1987, and in 1962 we had a full-fledged war. And every time within a year to about 3-4 years, we restored relations with China to an uneasy calm. So this is just going back to the pattern of an uneasy calm, number one. Number two, we don't understand the Chinese. If the Chinese don't speak English, and I don't mean that as English. It's just that they talk in riddles and puzzles.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And we neither have the time nor the patience for riddles and puzzles. Just come out and tell us what you want. They won't do that. Right now, China is on relatively weak footing because their one great asset against India was Pakistan. They love these free radicals to destabilize entire regions. They've essentially turned Russia into a free radical for Europe, against Europe. They used Pakistan as a free radical against India. They've used North Korea as a free radical against South Korea and Japan. And that's always been their idea. Now, Pakistan's big hold over India was two things: the Punjab insurgency, which ended in the early 2000s, and the Kashmir insurgency, which ended just about 5 years back. There are still terror attacks, but the state of insurgency is over. Like, you literally had the leader of the opposition walking around the capital of Kashmir without security. That would have been unthinkable before. So, what does Pakistan have? They're also collapsing. They've alienated the Chinese because they've taken a lot of money from the Chinese, but they haven't delivered on what they said they would deliver, because everybody in Pakistan is now trying to make money off the Chinese even before those projects get delivered. And that's pissed off China big time. So you've lost your one big free radical and its ability to do mischief and bog us down. So China's got this kind of weak hand, but there is no institutional way in which we're seeing the changes in China that would lead to any kind of trust.
But okay, so a couple more questions on this, the sort of the New Delhi perception of China vis-a-vis a couple of other entities, because I think it's pretty fascinating. Europe, obviously, the transatlantic relationship is pretty fragmented, if not broken now. You've, I think, interestingly identified Italy and France as being different to deal with than a lot of other European nations. I agree with the Italians have a very different approach to, say, Russia than the Brits and the French do, at least at the moment. What's the opinion of New Delhi vis-a-vis Europeans and trying to maybe get deeper ties with China then? Would that be an absolute catastrophic blow for New Delhi in terms of any reliance on Europe for markets or whatever?
That's in fact one of the biggest worries we have with America, with what Trump is doing right now. Because as Trump sees it, China is the big threat, and he needs Russia to contain China because Korea and Japan and Taiwan can't do it by themselves. So you
Hmm.
need Russia to join the containment. The problem is Europe then needs to contain Russia. And who's the big one who can contain Russia? That's China. So invariably, the closer Russia gets to America, if that happens, I'm not saying it's going to happen. Let's assume the Indian wet dream comes true in some alternate parallel universe, and Russia and America get together, gang up on China. Europe's natural outlet against Russia becomes China. And there, it's the technology flows that are going to matter, because Chinese technology right now is offset by Indian procurement of European or American technology, which is far superior. Now, once Europe starts exporting technology to China and that equalizes, that's not good for us, because then China will have both quantity and quality. And that's something you really don't want. Now, there are redundancies built in there. We have first European defense manufacturing. There is not one European manufacturer who does not have a deep, deep, deep integration with the American market.
Hmm.
And there will be consequences to pay if uh, Europe breaks rank on technology transfers or arms sales to China. The second, of course, is India is quite adept at playing divide and rule even within Europe. We've done it in the past. Uh, we're quite happy to do it again. While De Gaulle was driving the Americans and the Brits mad in the 50s and the 60s, India was quietly going whispering in his ear and encouraging his diffidence or what have you. It was fantastic for us. So we've not lost those tools. We can always reinvigorate those tools.
But Abhijit, if I can interject on that point, because I think Europe is waking up in a way that we haven't seen. Whether or not you agree it benefits Indian interests, I, as a European, want to see Europe more independent and autonomous, right? Taking ownership of things it should have done a long time ago. But there are still fragmented. How would basically India do it in this modern day version? Because Meloni of Italy has illustrated that she supports Ukraine's autonomy, for example, but she won't support the American and British in potentially sending peacekeepers, right? You've got Hungary and Slovakia, which are more sympathetic to Putin and Russia's version of events. So where would India focus, and how would they go about trying to, I don't know, manipulate the broader continent?
The first is defense sales. The second is bilateral free trade agreements. We may not be able to sign an EU free trade agreement, but we can do one with Italy. We can do one with France. You bring in the economic incentives. You bring in the defense purchase incentives.
Right.
There are ways of doing it. There is nuclear, especially because France is one of those countries that's willing to sell the entire Areva reprocessing chain technology to us if our purchases are sufficient. And it's probably getting to the stage where those purchases will get sufficient. It's reaching critical mass. So
Interesting.
the levers have always been there, number one. Number two, there are fundamental internal contradictions with European defense. Do you remember the Pluton and the Hades missile saga?
Yeah. Yes.
The Pluton was meant to be a short range missile, which would be used against the Rhineland or detonated in West Germany to warn Soviet troops thus far and no further. And the Germans were furious about it, and they got its successor, the Hades, withdrawn from service because, uh, to quote Helmut Kohl's exact words, it would be a stab in the back of the German soldier dying to protect France. There are nuclear powers think very differently from non-nuclear powers because there's issues of signaling and things like that involved. And Britain, again, because it has the benefit of the channel in between, thinks very differently from France on these same nuclear issues. Then there is the contradiction of what? A continent that has three different kinds of fighter aircraft, Each one has its own defense industry where it needs work share. It doesn't operate on an American competitive market basis. It's on a national share, work share basis. You remember the Eurofighter initially had France on it. They didn't want the Snecma engine on the Eurofighter, and so France withdrew and started developing the Rafale. There are such deep contradictions in Europe. We're not worried for the time being. We certainly don't think Europe can get its act together, number one. Number two, uh, look, I know this is going to be tough as a European, Pyotr, but bear with me. This is just the Indian view.
I'll
Uh,
forgive you.
the European is very used to a very generous social welfare scheme. After Ukraine, whatever the solution to Ukraine is, I don't know, but after Ukraine ends, how long is there going to be a threat perception where the European voter has to choose between social welfare and defense spending? And because there is no money, that defense spending will have to be based on debt, which means inflation, which is going to destroy growth. It's going to mean significantly higher living standards for the average European. How much inflation can Europe then deal with? These are all contradictions that we've not seen Europe deal with. Europe is a construct that was always meant to operate under American overlordship and an American security blanket. If America removes itself from that equation, we don't know how the chips fall.